Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. I am your host, Christy Haberman. I am glad you're here. Thanks for being a part of our community. A few disclaimers before we get started. I am a licensed therapist. However, this podcast is not to be considered mental health therapy or counseling. It is for entertainment purposes only and is not associated with my counseling practice, Christy Haberman Counseling Services. Thanks for showing up. Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. This is your host, Christy Haberman, and we have Kai the Wonder Dog with us today. And today we are going to talk about grief and money. So I had a listener reach out to me and tell me a story about her grief experience and money. And it's a little bit off topic of what we usually talk about, but I thought it was worth talking about because I have a feeling this happens a lot with people. So the person that reached out to me was taking care of her mother-in-law. And her mother-in-law was elderly. She had some breathing issues where she had to take an oxygen tank with her everywhere. And they were newly married. And his mother needed taken care of. So they rented an apartment. She had her own room. The mother-in-law did. She had her own bathroom. And they shared expenses. Mother-in-law was taking care of her expenses, and then the person that reached out to me, her and her husband were taking care of their expenses. And this arrangement worked for about 2 years. And gradually the mother-in-law's health began to decline. And it got to the point where she worked full-time. Her husband did not. But it got to the point that he could not take care of his mother anymore. And they were looking at putting her into a nursing home just because they just didn't have the ability to take care of her medical needs primarily anymore. So there was a brother that had not been involved up until this point. He had just let his brother take care of the mother-in-law. When he found out they were going to put her in a nursing home, he objected to this, and so he took his mother back to live with him in another state. The mother-in-law ended up dying and leaving a life insurance policy. So the life insurance policy was split between the two brothers minus the mother-in-law's final expenses. So there was a dollar amount that went to one brother and a dollar amount that went to the other brother. And that was 2 years ago. And everything appeared to be fine. Life is going on as normal. And then the other day, the mother-in-law's sister reaches out and starts complaining because she didn't believe that it was fair that the two brothers split the mother-in-law's expenses at the end of her life. She thought that the brother that had been taking care of the mother should get a greater share of the life insurance policy that was left. So for the person that reached out, this was just devastating to her. She's like, I just don't understand. We took care of her. We took care of her to the best of our abilities till that we couldn't take care of her anymore. The other brother decided that he could do it where they couldn't do it anymore. And she said, why is this happening after 2 years? And this sister of the mother-in-law just unloaded, just years worth of spewing, pew, 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 of this nastiness, all of her feelings that she had about the situation when they were living together, the fact that she felt like her nephew should have been taking care of his mother instead of making her contribute to part of the expenses. It was just a horrible situation. And so the person that reached out to me said, I just don't understand. I just don't understand. And so that is the ugliness of death, folks, is when it gets down to the money. So as I'm talking to this person, I said, saying, yeah, I mean, it happens. You did the best that you could. I mean, I don't think it's reasonable, especially since her son was disabled, that he pay for his mother's expenses when she had the ability to do that herself. And it was an arrangement that worked, as long as her health held up. And it was almost to the end of her life because she went to live with the other son for the last 2 months of her life. And so as I'm listening to this conversation, the person that reached out to me says, well, I just don't understand, especially on her birthday. And I'm like, what? She says, well, it's my mother-in-law's birthday today. And the sister had reached out over the weekend. And I said, that makes perfect sense to me from what I understand about grief and from what I understand about how people respond to triggers. So we're going to kind of dissect that a little bit. So what happens with me and what I have seen happen with other people around these anniversary dates, you really start second guessing yourself, and you really start second guessing the choices that the people that died made. And so I think what happened with the sister is she was missing her sister. And she had all of these feelings about the arrangement that her sister had with her son. And maybe she expressed them to her sister. Maybe she did not. Sorry, I'm still sick from last week. So maybe they shared these conversations. But I really feel like that the event of her sister's anniversary is that you want to change things, right? You want the death to not have happened. So you go back over, was this it? Was that it? Was this it? Was that it? And for her, she was thinking, well, maybe, this money situation wasn't taken care of fairly. And so in talking about the money, she was trying to reconnect, trying to recreate a connection with her sister that was deceased. Now, I'll try to understand that. So she's trying to make a connection with her sister and her death. And what is left, was a life insurance policy. And she must have had strong feelings about it when it happened. And, I don't know if it was a moment of weakness that made her lash out the way that she did. But I find this to be very common. Very, very common with people. And it's symbolic. So try to understand it's not really about the money, but it's symbolic. So like in my case, when my son died, I had to clean out his house. I had to, make arrangements for all of his things. and I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to do it. And I was also concerned about, his checkbook had disappeared. Like, you just don't want people to take from you. And money's very symbolic of that. You just don't want people to take from you because the person that died has already been taken from you. So I really don't believe that these battles that happen after funerals are about the things or the people or the money. It's about the fact that they can't let go of the person that died. And that was very much the case with myself. Is that I could not let go. It was going too soon, it was going too fast, and I started reacting to that. And so I was like a mama bear trying to hold on to everything when my world was just going crazy and it was chaos, and I couldn't think straight. And my heart was broken. It was just awful. And for some people, when during the event of the death, they stuff all of that, right? They stuff it down. They can't really cope with the fact that their loved one has died. And for some people, that reappears later. And I think that's what happened with this person that had reached out, sister, is that it's been 2 years. It's her birthday. And she was missing her. And there must have been some kind of instinct, some kind of trigger that made her think that I need to start letting go of her. It's time to let go of her. And when people come to that realization, like there's a reaction, I don't want to let go of her, so I'm going to lash out. I'm going to lash out to what I think was unfair about her death. And so she latched onto this idea uh, that the money should not have been split equally between the two boys. And I'm sure she had her reasons for why she thought that. But what she doesn't understand is how much that hurts the other people. And I've heard this. I've heard stories about people fighting over stuff. And the stuff becomes important. And if you were stuck in that situation where you were one of those people where the stuff became important, I really want you to stop and think about is what does the stuff symbolize? What is symbolic meaning of the stuff? Like for me with Christopher's belongings, I just could not accept that he was gone. It had happened too quick, too fast. I wasn't ready. And I felt forced. And when I feel forced, like I dig in my heels and I start fighting because you do flight, fight, or freeze. My instinct is to fight. There are sometimes I flee, and that would just look like disassociation, and then freeze. Freeze looks like people that sleep all the time. Depression is kind of in my mind, when it comes to grief, it's a little bit of a freeze response where if I just stay in this one place and I don't move and I just focus on this moment, I won't have to think about the next moment when my loved one won't be there. And I don't have to think about the past where my loved one wasn't there. All I have to think about is where I am right now and how sad and depressed I am right now. So it's like a freeze response. And so I told this person these things. She said, "Oh, that makes sense." Because she immediately went into her freeze response, which was, how could, so what would it be, aunt? Yeah. So how could my husband's aunt think such horrible things about us? But I don't think she was really thinking like this person thought about how horrible people they were. She just wanted things to be different. Like we all do when someone dies. We all want it to be different. So you can't prepare. And so the thing is, we can't prepare for these kind of things, right? Because then we assume that we know when someone's going to die, and we don't. I mean, we know that if we have elderly parents, there might be at some point that we're going to be facing the fact that we're going to have to be going through our parent stuff and all of those kind of things. But when it comes to our children, we really can't prepare for that. So what you're doing is you're going backwards and looking at it. And so the value of that is that relationships get damaged when someone dies. So in my family of origin, we all know, part of me is glad that my family doesn't listen to my podcast. They might really get upset at some of the things I talk about. But let's talk about when my grandmother died. So when my grandmother died, my mom, who we already know is not the healthiest person in the world, broke into her mother's house and stole things that were important to her mother. Not necessarily important to her, but were important to her mother. So it was like she was trying to keep a piece of her mother by taking these things. The problem being is that she did it behind her sister and her brother's back. And then it became that childhood rivalry again, right? So the perception was that my mom was always the favored child. Um, my Aunt Kathy was the invisible child, which means she just disappeared into the woodwork. And then my Uncle Melvin was very scapegoated. And so when you get your family together, you go back to your family dynamics. It doesn't matter how old they are. These people were in their 60s and 70s. And as soon as their mother died, they went back into that childhood dynamic again. And so they started to fight. They started to fight about their mother's things. But when you start to put it into the piece of, so Kathy always felt like my mom got everything. My mom always felt like she didn't get enough of her mother's attention. So she took her mother's favorite things as a way of hanging on to that image of her mother. So if I have my mother's things, this will prove that my mom loved me. Where Kathy's going, if I let her keep my mother's things, that means that I don't matter. So I need to have my mother's things. So then they start battling over their mother's things. It's very interesting when you're on the outside and you're watching this happen. And then my Uncle Melvin's like, "Oh, you both are crazy. Why would you want your mother's things? You know, they're just old things." But it was very important to these two women. And these are grown women. So then they start bringing their kids into it. You know, the cousins get into it. Your mom did this, your mom did that. And then it just becomes, pardon the expression, a shit show. So it's interesting watching all of this. So when I think about this person that reaches out, I'm thinking, so take a look. So go backwards. Because we can't prepare, right? So we're going to go backwards. And so take a look at symbolically, what did those things mean to you? So if you were recently involved in a funeral and it got ugly, what did the things mean to you? What were you trying to hang on to? And once you get that in your mind, you can repair the relationship that was destroyed when you were fighting over the things. Because the things are not about the things, they are about the relationship. And a lot of times it's about the family dynamic. So I got about 10 minutes left. Okay, so in every family, there are people that have roles. So especially among kids. So you have, and this comes from alcoholic families, but I find it applies to everyone. You have the scapegoat. This is the one that everything would be fine if this person were just fixed. They're the focus. You have the hero. This is the one that's, oh, they're the greatest. They're going to save the family. You have the clown. This is the one that when people start fighting, they start making everybody laugh and joke. And then they have the invisible child. This is the one that disappears from the family. So every time the family gets together, now think Christmas, think Thanksgiving, funerals, sometimes birthdays, sometimes families are close enough they get together on birthdays. So everyone plays a role. So when you get together in those big groups, you've fallen back into your roles. So you have to look at, what role do I play in my family? And what role do the things symbolize to me? And then it'll help you navigate the conflict. But just remember, it's after the fact. And one would hope that you could plan for it, but you can't always plan for it. So like, for example, my dad is elderly. I know that one of these days, I'm going to be having to do this for my dad. I already know, because he's married to someone that's not my mother, that I'm not going to get any of his things, which will be very difficult. So I'm already mentally preparing myself for that. But at the time that it actually happens, I might have different feelings because I'm not sure what his things symbolize to me until after he's gone. So in that respect, I'm not sure what will happen. And I think it will be a struggle. I know my brother and my sister feel the same way, that we won't be involved in that process at all because my dad has already, pretty much said so, and we already know. So in that respect, that we're prepared for it. So back to my person that I was talking to about this particular situation with her mother-in-law. At the end, she kind of understood about why her husband's aunt was reacting the way that she was reacting. Now, it doesn't make it easier. It doesn't make it easier at all. But what it does is help you to have some understanding. So we have emotions. So there's two sides of this. I used to be a cognitive behavioral therapist, which meant that you had the thought first and then the emotion. When it comes to grief, I've kind of changed my mind about that. I think you have the emotion first and then you have the cognitive. So I very much advocate you feel the emotion and then you have to cognitively address it. And in cognitively addressing it and talking your way through it is how you resolve it. But the emotion is always going to be there. So we can't do anything about the aunt's emotion surrounding the death of her sister. But if we understand where she's coming from, it doesn't have to emotionally devastate us. We don't have to react to it. And so that's always the goal, is to not reacting. And so next year, if this comes up again, this person will be more able to not react to it and not be so hurt by it. Because she'll know it's not really about me, but it's about the fact she can't let her sister go. She has to maintain some kind of control over something. And this was her way of doing it. So it's a little bit off topic today. I wanted to thank everyone for listening. If you have any feedback for me, if you would, leave me a message on Facebook at Grieving Insomniacs. I'm on Instagram, Grieving Insomniacs. And then I have an email, grievinginsomniacs.com. I also have a link in my podcast description where you can leave me messages. I would really like to hear what you think. If there's some topics that you want to talk about, or if you found this topic helpful, leave me a message. I would love to talk to anybody about that. How I'm doing if you want to tell your story on the podcast, what I will do is I'll send you a Zoom link. We'll talk about it. I'll save the audio and then I make it into a podcast. And so you can use your name, not use your name. It is up to you. It is however you want to do that. So our time together has gone by very quick. Next week, I think we're going to start the holiday prep, I call it. And yes, in grief, there is prep work for the holidays. You don't have to go into it blind. You just have to prepare your heart. So this is Christy Haberman and Kai the Wonder Dog signing off for today. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.